full-time profession, I'm a minister and have been so for 10 years. I also have started a small house publishing company. It's a Christian publishing company, but I'm wanting to, as time goes on, branch out into publishing literary works like modern classics. You know, things that people are writing now that are exemplary of what we appreciate in traditional classical literature. Kind of bridging that gap between the old and the new. I have a master's degree in Christian scripture and a degree in biology as well. I've taught some literature, and I have went through this whole journey since you talked about writing, ever since you can remember. I was in 3rd grade, and we had a writing assignment. We had to write about Christmas. And so here I am, my little 3rd grade self, writing down on my little notebook sheets of paper, and our teacher compiles it together and staples it. And we put our picture in the back, and I'm missing some teeth and grinning from ear to ear nonetheless. And I wrote, we had to write our own author bio, and I said, this was my passion, was to write. 3rd grade. I mean, what 3rd grader you ask, what are you passionate about? They say, I want to write. I've always sort of been odd in that way. I've always loved to read. I've always loved to write. And so once I finished grad school that we were talking about, I said, I'm going to go with it. And 2 days after I graduated, I started a blog, and it's been just a continuous journey from there. And so I really appreciate the opportunity to come and do this workshop. Again, I'm all about conversation, and if we can contribute to this conversation together, things that we can, learn from one another, that's the beauty of community, is to be able to grow together and be able to help one another to grow in our publishing and writing journeys. And so with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. There's this ancient Latin phrase in theology called ex nihilo. And I don't know if you've ever heard of this, but ex nihilo essentially means out of nothing. And it's a theological teaching that describes how the God of the Bible created the cosmos. And so it's that the fact that the God of the Bible spoke, that there was speech involved with this creative action that began to take place in the world. And what's really fascinating is, we say it was out of nothing, but in Genesis 1, it says, when he spoke to creation, let it come forth. Let there be water. Let there be plants. Let there be fish. Almost like there was this allowance that once creation was spoken to, there was a response of creation that came after that. Speech is always a response. Long before you and I could write or speak, we were spoken to. I was reading my theology books to my unborn children. God bless their souls. And so, long before we utter the words blanky or mommy or daddy, we have the speech, just thousands of words being poured into our lives. And so those very first words that we utter back are our response. Our language is always a response to our experience. And so you, as a writer, have this weight of experience, this weight of language that's been poured into your life by teachers, by books we've read, by people we admire, by people we've listened to. We've had all this speech poured into us, and we have this whole weight of our experience. And now, as writers, we want to contribute back to the conversation. We want to contribute back to that speech. And so we get ourselves up in the mornings, and we have all these ideas about what we're going to write and what we're going to do and what we want to say and how we want to say it. And then we sit down at our computer and we see this. The blinking line. It's a scary thing, isn't it? The blinking line. One author, he said the blinking line on that page, when he looked at it, just kept blinking like it was taunting me. There's a reason it's called a cursor. We all have a blinking line. Your blinking line is whatever sits in front of you, waiting to be brought into existence. What is it that's sitting there, that's right in front of you? And you're staring at this blank page or this blank screen, and you know that you have to release this, that it has to be you to say this in this way, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. Fiction is just a different way of communicating truth. And so we have this blinking line, and we have to ask ourselves, what is it? Is it that novel? Is it that memoir? Is it that compilation of poetry? Is it a compilation of short stories? Is it this nonfiction self-help book? Is it a spiritual book? What is it that's sitting in front of you waiting to be released? Well, this presentation is all about helping you to release it. Whatever it is that's living inside of you, we want to not only get that out, but get it to others. And that's what this whole thing is about. Helping others to engage your unique truth that you have to tell. Whether it's a children's book, whether it's, like you said, an entrepreneur's manual, whether it's articles that we get published, whatever it is that we have to release, this weekend is about that. And I want to be here to help you to be able to do that. So what this does is this goes in 3 sessions. We have the Art of Writing Well tonight. We have the Art of Publishing and Self-Publishing tomorrow. And then tomorrow as well, the Art of Expanding Your Work's Influence. My goal is to be your Sherpa. You know what a Sherpa is? They're the guys that lead the hikers and climbers up to the peak of Everest. And so my job, I wish I had like all the wisdom and knowledge in the world to be able to just endow and imbue you with it. Just some sort of diffusion happens, and man. But my goal is to sit here and hold your hand and walk beside you, to lead you around the twists and the turns and the craggy peaks that we encounter with our writing and publishing journey. Because if this lives in you and you must say it, it's worth hearing. It's worth hearing. And so that's what this whole weekend is about. And so writing at its most fundamental level is an arduous journey. It's not easy, right? It's not easy to explore the innermost parts of yourself, much less to do that on paper and put it out there for other people to examine, to read or critique or whatever else it is. But it's an arduous journey into your creative spirit. So creation, as someone has once said, creation is equal parts inspiration and discipline. So how do we fuel our creative core? How do we fuel our creative core? Well, a few years ago, 7 years ago, my wife, we were in Yadkinville, and we were walking downtown, and they have the Arts Council there, and they were offering a mosaics class. And she said, "Hey, let's take this class." I was, "Sure, why not?" So we took this mosaics class and learned how to piece all these things together and make some form of beautiful image. Remember, in this case, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And, we did that, and it was fun, and we went on and, aired out again. I would say, "Hey, we should do that again," or something. Years later, I'm sitting down and I'm writing, and I'm trying to think of a way. I'm writing nonfiction. I'm trying to think of a way to communicate beauty, like the essence of beauty, not cultural, superficial beauty that we all know. And the one thing that kept coming into my mind was that mosaics class. And so the mosaics class that I took years before with my wife, because I just thought it was something fun that we would do together, made it into a book. It fueled something that I didn't even know it would years later. New experiences fuel our creativity. Reading. Stephen King, who we all know has written many, many books, said, "If you're too busy to read, you're too busy to write." We have to read. Read all the time. Abraham Lincoln, and I'll talk about him a little later, carried a book with him everywhere he goes. You can ask the people at the library or my wife. You can tell everywhere where I've been, because there are remnants of those, aka books, around. They used to help me here when I was in grad school, because I was like walking in like this with all these books falling. But fueling your creativity happens when you place yourself in new experiences, and a book is a very good way of doing that, or an article or a story. Sit at the feet of giants. Who are people that are just putting out this creative nature all the time? They're creating things and they're exploring new avenues. Listen to them. What is it that fuels them? I love listening to NPR because they're all the time interviewing authors, painters, musicians, and I just love to sit and listen to what drives them and why do they create and why do they do what they do, because it helps me to think more about my own creativity. Creativity, Mary Lou Cook said, is inventing, experimenting, growing, taking risks, breaking rules, making mistakes, and having fun. If you're not willing to make mistakes in your writing, it's going to be hard to grow. The best thing that ever happened to me was my freshman English teacher. She challenged us to write a creative piece. And I always enjoyed writing, but I wasn't so good at it in high school. And so I did. I just released this creativity on page, and I get it back, and I'm having to get some Band-Aids because it's bleeding. There's so much red ink on this page. But the teacher said, this assignment was not about grammar. This assignment was about creativity. And she said, yes, you have a lot to work on in your grammar, but your creativity was very, very good. And that single experience fueled me to realize that it's okay to make mistakes in this journey, that failure is not the enemy, that failure actually moves us forward if we allow it. If we take the good and fix the bad. And so when we're looking at this first aspect of it is creating or inspiration. The second is discipline. Because even though we may be inspired to write something, if we don't have the discipline to actually sit down and do it, it's never going to happen. I like to think that the number one tool of a writer is a bottle of glue. The hardest thing about writing sometimes is getting your bottom in the seat to do it, because everything else in life is just happening around you, and it's hard to focus that, get there and just do it. And it could cause our work sometimes to just drag on and on, long beyond what we ever intend or should, because we just have to get there and do it. And so developing discipline in writing happens because it has to. Eleanor Roosevelt said, do one thing every day that scares you. And when I think about that, I think about sometimes how everything around us is happening so fast, and it's so difficult to get ourselves down to just write. And even to put these other things off for a moment is kind of a scary thought. But that's what it takes sometimes to have this discipline. So how do we do that? Well, we establish sacred space and sacred time. A time when no one else has. I learned this a long time ago, and I'm still having to remind myself of this when I read. Schedule, if you're reading somebody, maybe you're reading Stephen King's On Writing, and you just pencil that in your schedule. Well, Monday at 9 a.m., Stephen King and I have a breakfast together. No one can touch that. Just like you wouldn't cancel any other appointment you have with someone. So why cancel these? You have to establish some time that is sacred, that is a time that can't be touched by anything else. Develop a writing rhythm. Develop a writing rhythm each week. Along with that, don't derail when your rhythm breaks. Don't derail. There's so much pressure out there, and you read these blogs and you read these articles on writing. You need to be writing 500 words every day. And so you get in there and you're trying to write 500 words every day, and then one day is just so much going on, you can't do it. And then the next day it's like that, and you can't do it. And then before long you're like, well, I'm just not going to ever be able to get back to this. It sort of derails your entire plans. Don't see it that way. See it as a minor diversion, not a derailment. Turn off your devices. I don't know if that's a struggle for many of us here, but notifications, phone calls, text messages, emails, all those things, they're so much noise and they distract us in our time. And that's sacred time. I mean, if you have 1 hour to write, turn it off. Turn it off. It'll still be there after the hour. One thing that I found helpful is to set a word quota on your writing days. I don't write every single day. But what I do is I take certain months and I say, okay, this is when I want to get this writing piece done. This is the time period I'm going to need to do it in. And so on those days, I set writing quotas and I try to get those done. But I don't do that every single day. I do it in blocks. And that's just how it works for me. Everybody's different. Write naked. No, not really. Okay, not really. Ain Greeny, she teaches writing and has written quite a bit of works. Wrote a book that I'm going to be talking about later on. She says, I have a writer friend who in the wake of Hurricane Katrina joined a volunteer crew to help displaced and distressed people in New Orleans. During this devastating time, a local hardware store donated some work shirts for the volunteers. Now my friend wears her old volunteer shirt when she sits at her writing desk. She cannot get started until she's wearing that shirt. Another writer I know likes to do yoga before penning her first sentence. I once read an article about a writer who plays one game of solitaire before getting started. Say a prayer to the writing gods. Develop a pre-writing ritual that works for you, even if it means wearing a Stetson hat or writing naked. And then, thankfully, she adds, but not at McDonald's, please. But whatever it is for you, there are two things that I do. And actually, one of them I got at the book sale that they had here. It's ancient Celtic prayer book. It's beautiful. It's fantastic. And there's a prayer for the ancient scribe. And it's just incredible. It's so apt for what we do as writers. And so I pray that, and then I listen to the theme of Poldark. Now, do any of you know what Poldark is? It's a work it's a series of novels. Actually, I think there's 12 of them. And now they have the show out again. It was originally made in the 70s. They have a new one, and it's incredible. The library actually has it, so you should check it out. But that theme is just like the fiddles and the Cornwallian kind of music, Cornwall, England, Celtic kind of thing. I don't know. It just gets me going. After I do, I feel inspired, and so I'm in the right mindset to do this. Whatever it is for you, find that and do that. But have some way that you can develop discipline that both helps your inspiration as well as helps your inspiration to express itself on page. And so inspiration is what moves you to write, to create, to embrace the ex nihilo-ness of what you are doing, if that's a word. The discipline is what is going to see you through the highs and lows of the writer's daily rhythm and assist you in maintaining a singularity of purpose, seeing it through to completion. Both of these are your main tools to accomplish your aims, inspiration and discipline. If you only have one without the other, it's going to be, if you have discipline but no inspiration, yeah, you'll get a lot of writing done, but there'll be no heart in it. Or if you have the inspiration but no discipline, you'll have all these fantastic ideas, but that's all they ever are. They never manifest themselves. You've got to have both. And you've got to cultivate both of those aspects. And so now we're going to kind of shift a little bit to the actual writing and how to get this done. Why do you want to write? This is something we all have to ask ourselves. Why is it that you want to write? Do you want to write to help people? Do you want to write because this is living in you and you just got to get it out? And seems the best way to do that. Do you want to write because you enjoy the smile that children get when they pick up a book and read it? whatever it is for you, we have to identify our audience. This is one of the most important features of your writing, is to ask, who am I writing for? Who am I writing to? What am I writing for? And why does my audience need to hear what I must say? If you don't know who you're writing to or what you're writing for, you're going to get stuck very quickly in what you're writing. Are you just writing because you want to write for yourself? I mean, maybe you have no intention to ever publish anything. You just have to write and you want to do it, and that's fine. I think sometimes we as writers have this pressure that if we're writing something, it must be published. Sometimes it's good to just write. I love this story. There's a story of this 19th century European clockmaker. And he would make all these watches and clocks and stuff. And one day this man's pocket watch broke, and he brought it in to get it fixed. And so he saw the watchmaker taking it apart and everything. And on the back of one of the gears, there is this Latin phrase, if I remember correctly. Soli Deo Gloria. It means, it's how I think it was Mozart finished every of his composition. SDG, that's what that means. It means to God be the glory. And he asked him, he said, well, why do you put that on there? No one ever sees it. He said, I do. Our writing sometimes is the same way. It doesn't always have to be published. If it needs to be and you want it to be, that's fine. But realize, what are you writing for? Are you writing to inspire? Are you writing to help? Are you writing to help millennials in this crazy world figure out their place? Are you writing to bring joy to children? You need to ask what I'm writing for, who I'm writing to, and why does my audience need to hear what I must say? This is going to guide you throughout your writing. And so, make a list of why. And two, not only write out a list of why you are the one to say this, or why you must say this, but write why you are the one to say it. This will be important later on, because sometimes when we start to get further in this writing journey, we start to forget why we're writing, because we get caught up in all the little details, and the doubt starts to set in. The voices that we start to tell ourselves, who are you to do this? There's so many other people that's written better, or they've written this kind of work before, or whatever it is, they start coming. And so go ahead and write why you are writing this, and why are you the one that's competent to do so. And so the second aspect of this, focusing on your purpose for writing, is finding your voice. This is a very brief and very general overview of finding your voice. But I like Michael Hyatt. He has a great blog, and we're going to talk about him tomorrow when we're talking about expanding our work's influence. He's written a great book called Platform. But he said for nonfiction there's essentially three, and I added the fourth. There's the struggler. Are you writing as one, I'm struggling with this too? And I want to include others in my own struggle, in my own journey. Are you the Sherpa? As I talked about at the beginning of this journey, are you one that you've seen a ways ahead and you can help some people, come alongside some people and help them along on their way? Or are you the sage? You have experience. This is your profession. You are the expert in this field, and you want to, kind of like what you were talking about, before you retire, you want to write this entrepreneur's manual. You've been there, you've done that, you have the experience and the wisdom, and you want to imbue that on others who are up and coming. And then fourth, we have the memoir. Think about, if you're writing a memoir, your voice needs to be consistent. Don't change from, I was the child and now I just want to jump over to I'm the eyewitness, because unless you are both of those things, which very well could be the case, it could get confusing for your reader. So you have the child, parent, friend, grandchild, eyewitness. finding your voice for fiction. You need to learn to tap into the plurality of voices living in you. Now, what do I mean by that? Many of us, all of us, have experienced many things in our lives. We've been children. We've been adolescents. We've been teenager adults. We've been the employee. We've been fired. We've been the one who was filled with anger and got through that. We're the one that's been filled with pain. You know, pain is not the enemy. Pain is your call to greatness. And so if you can express that on page, tap into the voices that are living within you, especially when you're creating characters. You have all these different people that you are and have been all through your life. Tap into them. What would it be like if I were a teenager now? What would I think? What would I say? Use that in your work. What would it be like if I were just born? What's that experience like for the families and the ones who are being born? Readers, you know, when we speak, it doesn't matter what we're speaking about. We tell the world more about ourselves than we do about anything else. It's true. It doesn't matter what you're speaking about. You're telling the world about who you are. And so let your voice be authentic to you. And let them hear that. That's what makes this unique. That's what makes it, you know, I encounter this all the time with my writing. I do a lot of nonfiction writing. I do some other fictional writing, mainly short stories, and I'm dabbling in poetry now. A couple people can tell you. But when you're doing this, you know, your voice and your experience is what distinguishes your work from anyone else's. It doesn't matter if someone else has told it in a more unique way. No one's ever told it the way you can. And you might have a similar story, but it's very different. I encountered this in college. I wrote a short story in the romantic sort of ilk, romanticism type period. And I wrote this and from my own experiences and things, and I give it to my professor, and he looks at it and he says, that sounds a lot like this short story that William Faulkner wrote. Now, William Faulkner I like his writing. It's very thick, but let me assure you, it is nothing like what he did. But the storyline is what he was talking about. The storyline was very similar. I've never read this story before. So I go back and read it, and he said, I really like it. I like that it has this sort of similarities and themes. And the thing is William Faulkner wrote it a bajillion times better than I ever could. But he wasn't writing it from my perspective. And this was a fictional piece, but my authenticity and my experience came through in this. And that's what distinguishes your work from anyone else. And so Meg Rossoff, she said, your writing voice is the deepest possible reflection of who you are. The job of your voice is not to seduce or flatter or make well-shaped sentences. In your voice, your readers should be able to hear the contents of your mind, your heart, and your soul. That's what distinguishes your work. And so now we sort of get to the more difficult is how to focus on our writing while also doing the other little thing we have going on, aka our life. How do we get this done? Because we have so many other things going on, and usually writers, you know, we have this image, I always did, of the hermit, you know. The hermit, you know, he or she is able to go out into the wilderness for 3 months at a time in the middle of nowhere and just spend that time just writing and completing their work. And I think sometimes we almost have this nostalgia about past writers that's what they did. You know, they were able to just, maybe if you're Henry David Thoreau, you know, on Walden Pond, maybe you were able to do that. But besides him, there's very few people who are able to do that. Most of the ones that we esteem as classic writers wrote and had the same challenges that we do. And so how do we get this done? And this goes back to our discipline as well that we talked about earlier. How do we do this? Well, I always say we have to learn to write in the crevices of time. Learn to write in the crevices of time. They're there. Writing time is there. It might be very small. It might seem almost non-existent, but it's there, and you've got to reclaim that. So do you get a lunch break at your job? Turn that into writing time. It's 30 minutes, an hour. That's prime writing time. Lunch break. Sports practice. Do you have a child, a grandchild that has a practice? You're there 3 times a week. Use 1 or 2 of those practices to write. Drive time. This is a big one for me. Obviously, please don't be writing while you're driving. Okay? Don't do that. But most people have smartphones or some way that they can dictate to something. I don't dictate, I just think. Most of the time, I either leave my radio off or I'm listening to NPR for the reasons I mentioned earlier. Use that time for thinking. It's great time. If you've got a 15-minute commute, that's 15 minutes to be thinking about your work. If you have a 30-minute commute, that's 30 minutes. Capture that time. Early mornings. I go back and forth with this. I told Casey and my wife the other day, but she knows a lot of times, I was up at 2:30 in the morning working on this presentation. It woke me up. Sometimes 6:30 hits and I can't get myself out of bed. Sometimes 4:30, 3:30 in the morning hit and I'm up because that's quiet time especially. And that's hard to find with 2 children, small children, quiet time. And so my book that I wrote, the first one, most of it was either written at 12:30, 1:30 in the morning, or 3:30, 4:30 in the morning. That's when most of it was written. I'm convinced that if you want to be great in this world, in any form or fashion, you've got to be an early riser. I don't, and maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but it just seems like it's such a holy time because the world is sleepy. And when you're groggy like that, you're actually at your most creative. So it's really fascinating. And also, you just woke up from a dream. Could be fuel for your fiction. Late nights. I just mentioned that. Schedule a writing retreat. I've not been able to do this yet, so I can't speak about this from experience, but I've tried to, and I'm working on it. But it's something that I know a lot of people have benefited from. Waiting rooms at doctor's offices. They don't build waiting rooms because you're going to be going straight to the doctor's office. They spend a lot of money on those waiting rooms. They're going to use them, right? Unfortunately, and I've heard a lot of people talk about this, I wish that, I always have this idea that I'm going to go into the doctor's office and they're just going to take me right back. And then I go in there and they're like, go find a seat. 15, 30. I had a doctor, he was a great doctor. He's not practicing in Yakima anymore, but his last name was Waite. And he told me one time, he said, they don't call me Dr. Waite for nothing. And fantastic in that way. Fantastic in that way. I love him to death. But there's a waiting room there. 30 minutes of prime writing time. May even create some sort of opportunity for inspiration. You look around you. Child's nap time. If you have children, if you have grandchildren you're watching, nap time. Great time. I get a lot of writing done in that time. During exercise, one of the best and most creative times that I find is when I'm walking. It's when I'm walking. Walking fuels your creativity. And so you're killing 2 birds with 1 stone, as the cliche goes. You're getting exercise, you're accomplishing your writing. And so these are just some ways that we can reclaim these little crags and nooks of time that we have. And again, going back to something we mentioned earlier, when you have those times, turn your phone off because it will go off and it will distract you. And if you only have 15 minutes and you get distracted, it's going to take you a good 5 minutes to get, what was I doing? Where was that? You've lost that time. So remove as many distractions during that time as possible. Obviously, if you're in a doctor's office, that's impossible, but some of these ways you can. So let's look at some of these ancient and not so ancient folks and how they accomplish their purpose. Cicero, great philosopher. He said, what others give to public shows and entertainment, nay, even to the mental and bodily rest, I give to the study of philosophy. If your writing is that important to you and you're passionate about it, you got to say, yes, I would rather do, this seems at the time to be more fun. You know, people have this glamorous idea about writing. Like, oh, it's so glamorous to be a writer. We who write know it's not glamorous. It's a lot of lonely times sitting there writing and trying to put your thoughts and your heart into words. And that's difficult. And so it takes some sacrifice. What about F. Scott Fitzgerald, writer of The Great Gatsby, many other works? He immersed himself in writing from 1 p.m. to midnight on Saturdays and 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. on Sundays. This was why, let's see here. This was why he was in the Army. He served in World War I. And so he was continuing his work, and while his fellow soldiers went off to dances and bars in Kansas City, Fitzgerald planted himself at a table in a smoky officers' club and immersed himself in writing. He says after 3 months, he would live inside what he called smeary pencil pages. I like that kind of thought, smeary pencil pages. After 3 months of this routine, he had completed the 120,000 word draft for what would become This Side of Paradise. What about William Faulkner? William Faulkner, as we all know, and I've already mentioned him, was a fantastic writer. Probably one of the greatest American writers that we have. He, unfortunately, could not support his family. He got married, had 2 small children, couldn't support his family through his writing. So what did he do? He had to go back to work. He worked at a power plant at this university down in Mississippi. And he worked the night shift. And so what he would do is he would crank out a novel while he was doing this. While everybody was asleep. He would clock in at each day at 6 p.m. for a 12-hour shift from 11 to 4 while the world was asleep and not in need of much power because there wasn't much to do around the plant. So amid the hum of these machines, he found a wheelbarrow. And he overturned this wheelbarrow and he wrote. That was his desk. That was his writing desk. A wheelbarrow. He would do this in little spurts. And he would also come home. He'd sleep for a few hours. He'd get up. He'd write a little bit in the evening. And then he'd go back to work. He finished As I Lay Dying in 47 days. 47 days doing this. It's a classic. It's amazing. Now, obviously, Faulkner is a very unique individual. But what it goes to show you is that even these people who have left a legacy of fantastic and literary beauty, they suffered the same challenges that we do in getting their work done. Abraham Lincoln, I mentioned earlier, despite his many jobs, he always carried a book with him. And even he was a surveyor, he was a lawyer, all these things. He self-studied himself into being a lawyer and eventually into being a president, just by carrying a book around with him. And so those moments are there, those times are there to write. Reclaim them, see where they are, and say, how can I take all these things? What's my purpose for writing? What's my inspiration? And drive our discipline in those little wedges of time so that we can get this work done. Because until we finish it, people are still waiting to hear it. They just don't realize it yet. And once you finish it and they hear it, and you start to get that feedback, like, man, I wish I would have got this done a long time ago. So find those times and reclaim them. This is the end of this first part, and we're actually great time. Got about 10 minutes, a little over 10 minutes. So does anyone have any questions or thoughts about anything in this first session?
We'd just like to mention the shower.
Yes, the shower. Yes, yeah. She laughs at me because I tell her shower time is great thinking time. Yeah, and they actually sell pads that you can keep in the shower and write in there. They sell them, so we all should go invest in one. That's a great. Yeah, thank you for bringing it up. Yeah, I totally forgot about the shower.
In the movie Shakespeare in Love, every time he sat down to write, he did that little, he's like rubbing his pen and spun around, and I mean, he had his little
routine.
Yeah, I don't even know what to call it. It's like a dance almost that he did before he sat down to write stuff.
Yeah.
And he did it every time. I also like the movie because he's walking down the street and people are saying things, and he's like incorporating them, and they end up in his play.
Well, I think that's the thing. I think we think that if we could just devote ourselves to writing full time, like that's all we did was just write, man, our writing would be brilliant. It'd be fantastic. It'd be so beautiful. And the thing is we would probably lose all our inspiration if that's all we were doing. If we were just holed up somewhere in the middle of nowhere by ourselves, just writing, we might lose some of that, unless we're writing about the solitude and silence of creation. We might miss something. I mean, that annoying coworker, or that parent at the school, or this situation that you keep encountering at the doctor's office or on your way to the pharmacy, whatever it is. Those can be just like what you just said. Those can be fuel for your writing. Those can find themselves a way into a character or a theme. So, don't. We always have this grass is greener on the other side. The cliche that if we could just do this, then you fill in the blank. And the reality is we're in the place that we are for a reason. Channel that into your creative spirit and onto your page. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
Unfortunately, a lot of waiting rooms these days have
television. Yeah, that's right. They do have
television. First thing I do, if I'm the only one there,
that's right.
is I go and I turn it off.
Yeah.
And invariably someone comes and says, let me try. I say, nope, don't touch them.
Yep, that's true.
And,
restaurants or anywhere.
Very, very seldom does the second person come in to the waiting room
and turn it on.
Yeah. I leave the picture. Sometimes I just kill the sound.
Mm-hmm.
And people they sit. I guess they're thinking about the great American novel.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's right.
They're planning.
Yeah, they're in deep meditation. Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. I hadn't thought about that, but it is so true. Yeah, everywhere you go now, there's some sort of screen in front of you. Some sort of screen.
It's annoying.
It's very distracting. It's very. Yeah,
They're even doing it on the news now.
Yeah.
Like the Today Show. They sit there with their phones. And they're actually, when one of them is on camera talking, the rest of them are all with their...
They're overlooking at the other news stations to see what they're saying so that they know what to say. Yeah, it is. It's very much a distraction, and maybe you can write about that. I've been contemplating a poem that deals with that. It's so frustrating. Yeah, I actually don't have a smartphone anymore for that very reason. It's just a lot more quiet time. I have a cell phone, just not a smartphone. Yeah, does anybody have anything else? Well, we are finished with this first session, so I guess, Casey, we have a...
You finished with everything?
No. There's another session, but I thought we were going to do a little break, a little break
yes.
between. I
Okay,
think
you're confusing me. I'm like, wait a minute. Okay, yeah.
Everything in 1 hour.
We can take a break, and of course, the restrooms are out here, and all that good stuff. Everybody needs to get up and move around. It's always a good thing to do.